everyone. Thank you for joining Adam and I today as we record another video for our Nonprofit Fundamentals video series. We work a lot with nonprofits, and one of the things we notice is that there needs to be a good segregation of duties, good internal controls. Nonprofits are very much in the public eye. A lot of the information is public, 990s are public, so you want to make sure that you have good governance in place. And the reason is because you don't want to see fraud happen within your nonprofit. So we thought it would be great today to talk about a couple instances of fraud that have happened and what the lessons were from each of these cases.
All right. I feel like we're like news reporters today with our papers here. All right. So as April mentioned, we just want to go over some cases that have occurred, what happened, how it happened, and what are some takeaways? Because, fraud, nobody wants to have fraud occur, but, when it does occur, there's lessons to be learned, and there's those lessons you should be applying within your organization. So the first one, there was a $40 million embezzlement. This was a riverfront conservancy. What happened was the CFO diverted $24.4 million over roughly like a 12-year span to a shell company, so to a separate vendor that he himself controlled solely, that did not provide any real services. So just funneling money to a vendor he set up to give some money that way. And then so he used nearly $15 million of these funds to pay personal Amex credit card bills for various personal needs items. He also forged board signatures to obtain a line of credit with the bank. And then to help cover his tracks, he altered bank statements. So when the third-party accountants or the auditors come in, now looking at bank statements that are now hiding these facts. So April, with all that, what do you think are some key takeaways that someone can learn from that situation?
So in that situation, there wasn't good oversight over the vendors. So in your accounting system, there is a vendor listing. It's always good practice to make sure that only certain individuals have authorization to approve and enter vendors. And then there should be some oversight over the vendors to make sure that they are valid, some cross-check, whether you need a W-9 or other supporting documentation for that company. You should always make sure that you're doing the right vendor checks, especially in your system. In this situation too, there was also some weak reconciliation and oversight that failed to detect any manipulated documents, such as a line of credit where a signature was forged, a bank statement that was manipulated to remove any transfers. So there was some weak oversight in that respect. Also some poor board governance. So forged authorizations went unchallenged. It also may be very hard to detect if a line of credit is signed and it's a signature that's forged. So having some good oversight and some good vendor management were the lessons learned in this situation.
I gotta say, forging signature to get a line of credit, the bank, it's a crazy move.
It's a whole new level.
Yeah, you don't hear that too often.
All right, our next situation here is a healthcare foundation. This is a vendor kickback scheme for about $1 million. The COO is who is most involved here in this situation. The COO of the health foundation was involved in this case. They were falsifying invoices totaling about $3 million for services that weren't actually rendered, coordinating kickbacks from vendors for personal gain. The COO was also purchasing luxury items, so designer handbags, Apple products, and a rose gold golf cart with foundation money. So Adam, some lessons learned here?
So the first one, I guess, is the conflict of interest. So the COO was getting kickbacks from vendors. So what kind of relationships does the COO have with these vendors? That kind of knowledge in advance would have prevented some sort of kickback scheme. And it goes back to what April was saying about reviewing your vendor list, making sure everything has proper approval, authorization. You always want more than one person in any process when it comes to vendors, or, as also in this case now, falsifying invoicing and purchasing. You want more than one person in the process when it comes to purchasing. Someone is pulling out a PO or some sort of request for a purchase, somebody else needs to then approve that request. The same person shouldn't be doing that. That's really causing the issue in this situation.
Mm-hmm. And vendor oversight, like Adam mentioned, but also procurement in the sense of, you want to hire a vendor for a specific service or specific goods. Procurement is making sure that that vendor is legitimate, or you get 3 bids. You want to make sure that you are picking the most appropriate or most cost savings as a nonprofit. So there should be procurement policies in place for a nonprofit.
That's a great point. Yep. All right. So the next one now is a community and social service organization. So what happened was similar idea with vendor embezzlement, but coming from the IT side of things now. So an IT executive at this organization actually owned the IT vendor that the company was using. So once again, conflict of interest going on here. They submitted invoices from a fictitious person to conceal the ownership, to kind of hide their tracks in the situation. And then from that, they were able to profit from inflated or unnecessary IT contracts, as they're the individual they're the IT individual who's in charge of IT infrastructure, and they're doing business with themselves. Definitely a big no-no. So, April, with that said, what kind of lessons can be learned from that situation?
Mm-hmm. So I think definitely conflict of interest checks are important. Making sure that any vendor ownership is disclosed. I think that's an important piece as well, that check over the vendors. Those are really, I think, the 2 key ones here is conflict of interest policies and procurement. Mm-hmm.
You can probably start sensing a theme going on here when it comes to the takeaways.
So our next situation is a nonprofit that is governed with grant money. So they are funded with grant money, and in this situation, they misused federal grant dollars over a span of about 2 years, and it was about $225,000 of funds that was misused. They were used for personal expenses, things like wedding, travel. The authorized payments to the CEO did not have any proper checks or review, and they misreported the grant funding, the grant spending to funders. So in this situation, biggest thing here is the lack of review, I think, over the grant reporting and this misuse of funds. A lot of times a CEO is the one signing off on expenditures or signing off on this reporting. So there may be times where a board needs to be more involved in reviewing these things. But I think it comes down to the overall procedures over your expenses. So you want to make sure that there's always the proper backup, proper review, proper support behind those expenses, especially if employees are being reimbursed. There needs to be a higher level, another person reviewing that as well, if employees are being reimbursed.
Yep. There should always be someone who's submitting requests and then someone approving it, or someone doing the work and someone reviewing. There should always be more than one person involved.
Right. And that's part of that segregation of duties that we talk about often.
All right, so last one we got here is a housing and support service organization. Essentially, the executive director was writing unauthorized checks to himself, altering financial records, and also using credit card and other means to pay for personal expenses. So with that, kind of similar situation to the others, but any other takeaways someone could get for that?
So in this situation, some of the lessons learned was there was some weak board oversight, a lack of reconciliation over funds and over the expenses. Same thing with the lack of segregation of duties, like we saw in a couple of these other situations. The executive director controlled both operations and finance, so the person was very heavily involved in that area without others involved. And then inadequate financial reporting and review.
Yep. So, through all these examples, when you look at the titles, it was the CEO, the CFO, the COO, the executive director, or a high-level IT individual.
Right.
So you see in each case, it's the top that's really causing the frauds or, performing the frauds. So that's a scary thought for an organization or for a board member that the fraud could be coming from the highest level of management.
Right. Usually, the board allows top management to make certain decisions and have a certain amount of oversight. And there, it may blur the lines a little of how much you trust your C-suite. If they've been with you a really long time, there may be a level of trust there, but you always have to be a little skeptical, making sure that there's the right level of reviews and oversight.
So what are like the top 5? Maybe not 5, but what are the top takeaways that someone could take from this?
So I think the top takeaways are the conflicts of interest, making sure that you have a conflict of interest policy, that it's reviewed regularly, that board members and maybe as well top management reviews those signs of conflict of interest. Procurement and vendor oversight is another one. You want to make sure that vendors are all legitimate. If there's no relationships between your C-suite and your vendors, that's really important. Making sure that all of the vendors are legitimate. Some review over the financials and the financial statements as well, maybe spot checking bank statements or bank reconciliations. Another way to see vendors that are being paid is by looking at the bank statement and all of the cleared checks. So often there's the appearance of oversight, but then there's the actual oversight. So if a board is checking those bank statements every so often to make sure that vendors look reasonable, I think that's a really great procedure to have in place.
And also, a few of these alter bank records. So a way around that is having bank statements go to more than one person. So maybe it's going to the CFO or the CEO, and maybe it's going to the board president. Just more eyes on something helps prevent any potential issues.
Another takeaway is audits. Audits don't always catch everything. Financial statement audits are not designed to catch fraud, but having a regular audit, whether it's your internal audit where you spot check things internally, or whether you have a financial statement audit done by your CPA, those still have a level of oversight, and they could also help bring things to light if anything was going on.
Sometimes the best way to prevent something is just the idea that someone is looking at it. That could stop any fraud in its tracks. Nobody wants to take the risk at that point.
And then I think the last takeaway is if you do have these policies like conflict of interest or procurement, it's making sure that you enforce them. I think that's the other piece.
Definitely.
Anything else I missed?
No, I think that's a good summary. Fraud's a scary word. And, for a nonprofit, if there's fraud, the media jumps on that and makes it very public. It's a huge issue. Everybody likes to then jump on and really demean a nonprofit when it's usually just one bad actor. So definitely want to make sure you have the controls in place, the policies in place to ensure fraud does not happen in your organization.
Yeah, and if we can help you in any way with these policies or the oversight and how to structure your internal controls, just reach out.
All right. Thank you, everyone.